There are two main parts to the changes. The first is to provide a better experience for those with disabilities. Today we have 4 accessible, that is, handicapped parking spaces. With these changes, we will continue to have 4 accessible parking spaces. The 2 accessible parking spaces along the lawn area will be dropped because the spaces have too much slope to really be good accessible parking spaces and will be moved to new locations. A new van accessible parking space will be added in the last 2 angled parking spaces toward the sanctuary building fronting on the ravine. This space and the adjacent accessibility zone next to it will accommodate vans with an onboard lift used to transport people in wheelchairs. The accessibility parking spot outside the door of the community room will remain, but it will be moved toward the community room door, and an accessibility zone will be marked off on the right-hand side of the parking space. The accessible parking space next to the ramp to the fellowship hall will remain, and an accessibility zone will be marked off to the right-hand side of the parking space. A new accessible parking space will be created in the parking space toward the door to the education building next to the stairs to the fellowship hall, and an accessibility zone will be added to the right-hand side of this space. Presently, the first 2 parking spaces closest to the education building door are designated for families with small children. The first parking space will remain designated for families with small children. The second parking space becomes the accessible parking space because it has space next to it for the accessibility zone without taking up another parking space. The second parking space designated for families with small children will be moved to the third parking space, which is the space that overlaps with the stairs to Fellowship Hall. The second main part of the changes is to address some of the problems created by those who have tried to create parking spaces in place where there are no parking spots. There are no marked parking spaces around the base of the sanctuary building because this space is needed to provide room for passenger vehicles and emergency vehicles to get between the building and the vehicles parked in the parking spaces across the aisle. No parking fire lane zones will be marked in red around the building, and no parking signs will be posted in 4 places on the sanctuary building and in the area in front of the dumpster. The space before the first parking space closest to the education building will be marked with a no parking sign. If you have questions or understand easier when you physically see what we are doing, meet me outside the entrance to the elevator after church, and I will answer questions and give you a tour of the changes.
Many hats, and he wears all of them this morning, I think. Among other things, Dorian is the Vice President of Philanthropy for Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Western North Carolina. So if you were a part of the Big Brothers Big Sisters Gala last night, you might have seen Dorian waltzing around and talking with folks at the Roaring Twenties Gala last night. In addition to being the Vice President for Philanthropy for Big Brothers and Big Sisters, Dorian also happens to be about as United Methodist as John Wesley himself, I would say. Dorian is a certified lay servant and has been since 2012. He's the Staff Parish Relations Committee Chair for his local church. He's on the Catawba Valley District Committee on Superintendency and the District Committee on Ordained Ministries and the Conference Board of Laity. So those are some of the more official kind of hats that Dorian wears. Maybe the one that takes up the most of his heart and time is this, that he and his wife Harmony are adoptive parents of 2. So in all of that, in this introduction for Dorian, I hope that you hear 2, maybe 3 things. Dorian is a person who loves God and God's church deeply. And he's a person who loves children, his own and those of every community in western North Carolina. And I'm so thrilled that Dorian is here to be our guest preacher this morning. Would you join with me in welcoming Dorian? And with that, I want to invite you now to stand and let's greet our neighbors with the peace of Christ.